Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the music mixing crash course. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and I'm very happy that you're here today with me. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot. Before we get started, just so I'm sure that everybody can hear me and see what's going on, if over in the chat you can just tell me that you hear me and you can see the screen, the intro screen, and as soon as we know that, then we can get going. Also, it's nice if you tell me where you're from and who you are, of course. So, okay, Alan says it's good to go, and so does Jay. Cool, very cool. Same with Steve. Thanks for being here, guys. All right. So you're here for one reason, and you want to learn the tricks behind the radio sound that you hear. And let's face it, we've all gone through this before. I've gone through it, and just about every mixer I know has gone through it, where you do a great mix, but it doesn't sound like what you're hearing on the radio or Spotify or wherever the case. So hopefully I can give you a few tricks today that will get you closer to that goal. And if you stay till the end, I'm going to give you a thank you gift. It's an ebook. It's Mastering Your Songs in 6 Steps. If you want to master your own songs, and let's face it, a lot of times we don't have the budget to do anything differently. I mean, we have to do it because we just can't afford to go to a mastering engineer or an online service. Then we want to be able to do it ourselves, and this will help you. I just saw over here, looking here, Dean is from Thomaston, Connecticut, Alan from Summerlin, BC, Robert from Houston, and Morton from the Arctic Circle. Wow. Very cool. I don't think I've ever had anyone that far north on a podcast or on a webinar. So, again, I'm Bobby Owsinski. I'm a mixer and a producer and an author, and hopefully you've read one of my books. I've written, 23 books in the music business on recording and mixing and the music business and just about everything that has to do with music as well. And you can see on the bottom some of my newer books, the Mixing Engineer's Handbook 4th edition, Recording Engineer's Handbook 4th edition. So hopefully some of you guys have some of these books. I also write a couple of blogs, and my big picture music production blog has been, I think there's about 7 million views so far. It's been going on for quite a while, I think 5 or 6 years. And Music 3.0 music industry blog, same thing. And I'd sure like for you to check those out, as well as my podcast as well on the bottom, Bobby O Inner Circle podcast. When I first came to Los Angeles, which is quite a long time ago now, I took whatever gig I could, which is actually good for my mixing chops. What I did is I took commercials. I did a lot of scope commercials. They're pretty interesting, actually, because mixing for commercials is way different than anything else because you have a certain amount of time. Basically, you have 3 hours to do the commercial. The first hour, you record it. The second hour, you do all the overdubs. The third hour, you mix it because it's all union. And at the end of the third hour, you're out the door. So everything is pretty high pressure about getting it right. I also did a bunch of movies. I did a good movie on the right, as you see, and I did some pretty bad movies like the one in the middle. And then eventually I got into mixing surround sound. I was one of the first mixers to do that. So I got a lot of work from major artists for their DVDs and SACDs and things like that. And these are just some of them here. I eventually did 125 or so major artists. And it was really a thrill to be able to work with some of the best artists, the artists that I grew up listening to. It was very cool. And recently, also, I've had some success. I had a number 2 on the Billboard Blues charts that I produced and mixed, Double Crossing Blues by Adriana Marie and her Groove Cutters. And I also had a number 6 on the iTunes charts as well last year. So you want smooth, polished mixes, like you hear in the radio, and I'm going to help you get there. First of all, there are 6 mix elements, but really 4 of them are the most important. If you don't get these first 4, then the other 2 don't matter all that much. The other 2 being panning and interest. But really, you need to get everything balanced up, and everything has to be clear and distinct, which comes from EQ. It has to sound powerful, which is what you get, and controlled, which is what you get from compression. And you need a polish and sheen, and that comes from effects. So I'm going to show you a little trick with each one of these today. So the first one is the secret to great balances. And really what this is about is there's always a problem that everybody has. You'll be mixing in your own mixing environment, in your studio. It doesn't matter how big or how small it is, doesn't matter. It will sound great there. And then as soon as you take it out, play it in your car, play it on a different set of speakers, play it at your friend's house, whatever the case, it doesn't sound the same. Does that happen to you? Bet it has. It's happened to everybody sooner or later. And usually it happens right in the beginning until you figure this out. But this is the secret that most pros use, basically, to overcome that problem. So I think you're going to get a lot out of this. Most mixers will use 3 different levels when they mix. And these levels always stay the same. The reason why is if you start to vary your levels all over the place, then it's hard to get a good reference point. And also, sometimes your speakers sound different at different levels. So if you lock in these 3 levels, then you find that you get used to them and you know how they sound. So for instance, there'll be 3 levels. There'll be one that will be fairly loud, and that's just for getting the low end together. And then there's one that's moderate, not too loud, and that's for most of the mix. And then there's one that's very quiet. So at the end of the mix, you go to the very quiet one, and then you can pretty much hear how your balances really are. It's surprising at a low level. Things will jump out at you or not jump out, and you can really tweak things very well. So what do I mean by 3 levels? Okay, I'm going to use the master fader here. Now, I normally wouldn't do that. I'd use my control room level control, but in this case, I'm going to use the master fader just so you can hear the difference. So this would be my mid-range moderate level that I would work at most of the time. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. Okay, so now if I really want to focus in on the low end, then I'm going to turn this level up. And you have to move a little bit of air. Not for a long period of time. It might only be for 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the most. You're not going to play it very loud all day, for instance. It's just going to be until you figure out what the low end is. And it's very difficult to do that unless you move some air. So now have a listen. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased. So now you can hear that we can zero in on our low end and pretty much hear what things are like, and we can tweak them as needed. Now, the third level is very quiet. And what do I mean by very quiet? I mean just about a whisper or a little above. So much so that if someone comes in the room and begins to speak with you, they're going to drown the level out. So it's very, very quiet. So it's something like this. Now, it might even be quieter than that. I'm wearing headphones, so there's no feedback here, and it's very difficult to kind of gauge this stuff with headphones. But what I'd be doing in this case is I'd be listening, first of all, at the very, very low level on my normal speakers and getting the level there, and then I'd be transferring to a very bad, crappy pair of speakers, a $10 pair of speakers, the worst speakers that I can find, and I'd be listening on that as well. And if you do these and go back and forth between the three levels, even towards the end of the mix, you still might want to go to that high level again, that loud level. Just check your low end one more time and then bring it all the way down. But you'll find that when you do this and just keep those three levels, that all of a sudden your mix is going to balance out better. And by not really varying the levels all the time, and a lot of people do that. They'll turn it up at random and they'll turn it down at random and then they'll put it to another spot to do their mixing at random, and they're always moving the level control, and that's very confusing to your ear, and it really is something that is going to be bad for your balances. So three levels, and you'll find that that's going to work much, much better than just about anything. Three mixing levels. And the interesting thing is, this might seem kind of foreign to some of you, but really this is a tried and true practice for both video and film. Video, for instance, or television, I should say, listens at 82 dB. They never vary. And for film, it's 85 dB, and they never vary from that. It never changes, ever. So it's not that far of a stretch to do this for music as well. The only thing is, it's kind of arbitrary in that you're going to find a medium level that you're always going to stay at, and it's going to be comfortable. It's not going to be too loud, just comfortable that you can hear. And once you find that level, you should nail it down and not move from there. So in other words, put a notch or something on your monitor controllers so you know where to always go. You also need a loud level, and it's only for a very short period, just to make sure that you have the low end right. And this is a problem that I faced for a long time, a mistake I personally made, where I didn't play things loudly enough for some of the mix and therefore never got the low end right. So this is important to do that. And then, of course, the quiet setting at the end is something that, again, might be counterintuitive, but it's really important. When you go down as low as you can go, as quiet as you can go, suddenly the balances jump out at you. And you can hear when something is too loud, and you can hear when you can't hear something as well. So this is a tried and true method that will definitely work. It will help you on your very next mix. Just give it a try, and I think you'll be happy when you find the results. It doesn't actually take that much to figure out. It more or less takes time to figure out the right level, but once you get your levels together, everything else sort of falls into place. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to talk about equalization. And let's face it, we all want our mixes to be clear and distinct, and to be able to hear all the instruments. And here's a trick that you can use that will take you down that path and get you there very, very quickly. When it comes to EQing, people that haven't mixed a lot tend to do the same things that really fall into a trap. And the first thing is to always EQ in the same places. So in other words, you'd have several tracks that would have the EQ boosted at exactly the same place. And as a result, what ends up happening is that they clash. So let me play this track for you. Concentrate on the guitars because they sound pretty much the same, and then we'll solo them up and have a listen.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh, never.
Okay, now let's solo these up. And that's another problem. A lot of times, engineers that, again, haven't mixed for a long time, they'll tend to solo the instrument and just do all the EQing. And they'll solo each track and go along, EQ it, make it sound good. But the problem is they have to fit together. So sometimes something that sounds really great by itself sounds really crappy when it's in the mix. And it may not fit in the mix. So that's why when you're EQing, it's best to always listen to another instrument, and I'm going to show you how to do that. First of all, let's listen to these two guitars. Now, I didn't track this, so I'm not sure if it's two different guitar players or if the same player. Kind of sounds like the same player. And again, even if it's two players, what tends to happen sometimes is they may be using the same guitar and the same kind of amplifier and have basically the same kind of tone. So right off, you're going to have a lot of butting of frequencies. And that's one of the reasons why you find guitar players, studio players, have a lot of different instruments and a lot of different amplifiers, is because they'll mix and match the sound in order so they don't have those frequencies. But in this case, we have two similar sounding guitars, so we're going to try to fix that. So let's listen one more time. Okay, so I'm just going to add regular Pro Tools EQ, nothing fancy here, and we're going to start on the right guitar. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten this one up. And I might not always do it this way, but just as an example of how this is done, I'm going to brighten it up somewhere 3-4K. Now, again, the big problem would be is if on the left one, I also EQ at the same frequency. So watch. So here we go. We have the same problem where things are boosted at the same frequency. So no matter what, they're just going to sound the same. They're going to basically interfere with each other and mask each other in the mix. So the way to do this is if something is boosted at one frequency on the similar sounding instrument or the one that's masking it, you cut that frequency. Watch. Okay, so that sounds better already. And what I would do is I would boost at another frequency instead. And I may add a little bit of another frequency around it. Now, you can see they both sound different now. They don't clash with one another. And even though I really attenuated one frequency on the left-hand guitar, it really doesn't sound that bad because I'm boosting at other frequencies. This is pretty much the way you would do it in a mix, but you would go one track to another and keep on listening back and forth. And always make sure that if you're boosting at one frequency, you're not boosting on the next track at the same frequency. You just try to be a little different, or you cut. Don't be afraid to cut, because a lot of times cut might work better. Now let's just listen in the track here for a second.
I heard a lot of sweet talk in my time, but your pretty words was a mess on my mind. It's like a never, oh, never.
Okay, so I'd take this one step further and I'd EQ both guitars against the vocals, so the vocals don't cover them up and they don't cover the vocal up. And I'd probably go and listen to some of the other instruments as well, just to make sure that, in fact, nothing is masking anything else. Now, there's another way to approach this. So what we're going to do is just cancel this out, and here's what we'll do. On the right-hand guitar, I'm just going to do a really big cut. So I'm going to cut a lot of the low end off. Let's EQ it up. Now I can do it like this, or I could do it with a filter. Let's just try the filter here. And I'll make it really steep, and I'll cut it off here. And on this one over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to boost a little at that frequency. So somewhere in the low end, I'm just going to boost it up.
Like this before, I've been swell, kept up all night. Sometimes I didn't rest at all. I've been shifting.
So I don't like this in this track as much, but this is another approach where what you might do is get rid of all the low frequencies on one guitar or one instrument and boost them where you cut on the next track. And sometimes this works like magic, and it really makes things fit better into the mix. So again, we did this in 5-10 minutes, but normally this might take several hours, maybe just on these two instruments, getting them to fit in the track. So this is why mixing can take really long, because you're constantly carving frequencies to make them work, to make the instruments work with all the other instruments, all the tracks work together so you can hear them all. And again, the EQ helps you do that. You don't need a lot of it. Sometimes just a dB or two is all you need to make things really fit together well. So that was a way tracks are as distinct as possible. It's only the tip of the iceberg, but the whole thing is make sure that you don't just boost only. And this is very, very common. Just use the EQ for boosting, but cutting can be very effective as well. But there's a secret here, and that's if you're going to boost, don't boost several tracks at the same frequency, because then you get a buildup, and then it's very difficult to distinguish one from the other. They mask one another. So basically, if a track is boosted one place, a way around that is to cut on another track and maybe boost someplace else. And then you'll find things will sound a whole lot better. Now, the last thing is really important. Try not to EQ when the track is soloed. And I know how difficult that is, because really you can't hear things, right? Or you think you can't until you actually go into solo. Well, the fact of the matter is, when you get something that sounds great when it's soloed, chances are it's not going to sound good when you put it back in the track. It's going to stick out, or it's going to be buried, one or the other. So the only way you get around that is to constantly listen against other tracks. And this is why mixing takes as long as it does. This is why you can have an 18 or 20-hour mix, because you're constantly going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until everything sounds pretty good and you can hear each thing distinctly. So those are some of just the things to think about the next time you do a mix. By the way, we're going to have Q&A at the end. So, and I see you've started already. You can start to put those questions up in the chat, and I'll be sure to get to them here in a little bit when we get to the end. Okay, let's talk about compression now. Many times what we'll do with the compressor is just put it on the track and not change any of the parameters. And sometimes the default parameters work great and it sounds great, and other times not so great. So what I'm going to show you here is the secret to using a compressor that's going to work on every single compressor that you have, if it has these parameters, and you're going to find it's going to make a big difference right away. The very next mix you do, if you do a mix later today and you use this, you're going to be very, very pleasantly surprised. Sometimes one of the hardest things is to understand compression and how to set it up. And you'll find that many musicians, especially who are trying to mix, will basically use the default setting all the time. Now, you can actually get some good results that way more times than not, but pros actually approach it a different way, and they use the parameter controls that are available to them actually to make things work a little better in the mix. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the compressors on kick and snare, and I'll do one in the vocal as well, so you can just see how that kind of works sometimes. So we have these two kick drums here. We have one that's in and one that's out, and they're subgrouped to this track right here. And let's listen a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to use just a B-flat Pro Tools compressor, nothing special. They'll all be set up exactly the same way. And here's what we'll do. Now, the first thing is, if you want a lot of punch, use a low ratio. If you want a lot of control, use a high ratio. So that's the difference here. Punch on a low ratio is what we want. It may be pretty low. It may be 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, something like that. So that's where we're going to start. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take the attack, turn it all the way up as slow as it will go, and the release all the way to the left. So basically what we want is a very slow attack and a fast release. We're going to start there and then watch what's going to happen. I'm going to increase the threshold. Now, there's actually some motion that's happening there on some of the peaks. And now the first thing we're going to do is back the attack off. Now watch. Now, first thing that happens is if we back it off too much, it's going to take the transient out of the attack. So now we're going to lose the punch out of it. So where is it right? Well, just about the time you begin to hear the sound get dull, that's when the attack is set correctly. So we'll hear it get dull and we'll back off a little bit. You can hear how bad it sounds there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start to increase the release. And as we do that, we're going to get more and more compression, so we'll have to back off the threshold as well. Now, what am I trying to get here? I'm trying to make the sound longer, especially on the drums. So instead of just going bap, I'm trying to make it go bap. So the sound is longer, and you're doing that with the release. And ideally, what you're trying to do is make it long enough so it stays until the next hit. You can't always do that, but you want it to sort of breathe with the song, breathe with the tempo of the song, with the pulse of the song. Now, you don't need a lot of compression to make this work. Now we'll bypass it. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen at pretty much the same level. If you add enough compression, or if you do this the right way, you'll find that your level is going to go down when the compressor is in the circuit, in the signal path. When you bypass it, it's going to get louder. So that's why we use the gain control to boost it up. So if you bypass it, or if you have the compressor in the signal path, it's the same level. And you can hear that get pretty punchy. So let's listen to the track. And you can hear it when I bypassed it, it kind of got lost in the mix. Now, obviously, we'd use a different compressor than this. There are several others that will work better and will just give you a better sound because they're made more for this type of program material. But just to show you that you can use just about any compressor and make it work if you know what to do. So now what we're going to do is go over on the snare drum. It's the same thing. We have 2 tracks, snare top, snare bottom here, and then a subgroup. So here we go. We're just going to use our normal B-flat Pro Tools compressor. Have a listen. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put it on a low ratio, somewhere around there. Very, very fast release, slow attack. And now we're going to back the threshold off until we start to see some deflection on the gain reduction meter. Now we're going to increase the attack. And you can hear what happened. As soon as we got past a certain point, it really dulled and it just sucked the life out of it. Now we're going to add the release. Hear how it smacked? It's too much compression, so we'll back off the threshold. Okay, so here it is without the compression and with. But listen in the track. Here we go. And you can hear the snare still when it's bypassed, but it just gets lost a little. It doesn't have the edge. So we're adding that little edge and we're making it just jump out of the track a little bit more. And again, we'll do that in other places in the drum kit as well. And when we add them all together, you're going to have a really punchy drum kit. But if we use some other compressors that are better tuned to the drums, the sound will be a lot more dramatic. But this is basically the way you do it. You try to make the attack and release set in such a way that it pulses with the drums. Now let's go on the vocal for a second. Let's have a listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Now this is pretty compressed already. When it was recorded, it was pretty well compressed. So the effect won't be quite the same, but we'll do the same thing. I'm going to put my normal B-flat compressor on. Actually, you know what? Let's just put the 1176 on so you can hear what happens. And the 1176 works backwards. So this is the fast release. This is the slow attack. Let's listen.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you.
Okay, hear what happened when we really made the attack fast? All of a sudden, we started to miss the beginning of his words.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased.
See, it sounds better. So what we're going to do is back that off.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees, pleading and begging for more.
Okay, now Let's just back off on the release a little bit.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, and teased, but never like this before.
Let's listen in the track.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
And without it?
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Sounds good, but just doesn't sound quite as good as with the compressor.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
And you can see I'm actually adding quite a bit of compression, and you'll find there are some times when you'll add a lot and it will sound great, and other times where you add a lot and it will sound terrible. So it depends on the program that you're using it on, depends on the track that you're using it on. But the whole idea is to set the attack and release controls so the compression breathes with the track, breathes with the pulse of the track. That's the whole it's common to put an effect up, put it on the track that you want, and not have it work, and not know what to do. But there's actually a trick that a lot of mixers use to make their effects blend in with the track better. And it's with little EQ. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to the snare drum here, and I have it assigned to actually not a great sounding reverb. It's an air reverb. It's not tweaked at all. So basically this is just the settings that are defaulted. So there's no tweaking. And normally before I would do this, I would tweak the release or the decay time, and I would tweak the pre-delay time. But we're not even going to do that, just so I can show you how this works. So we have the snare soloed up. Have a listen. Now this sounds pretty crappy actually, and we can make it blend in with the track fairly easily. So we're just going to bring up a B-flat EQ, and the fastest way to make this work, usually the thing with reverbs especially, is the low end gets in the way. So if you get rid of the low end on a reverb, it will still sound really good, it just won't take up as much space. So have a listen. Let's solo this up so you can hear what's happening. Now I can do this with the high pass filter, or I can just do it with the low end EQ, but now you hear what happens. So you heard it cleaned it up quite a bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing only with the high end. So now I'm going to take the high end, and here's what we'll do. We'll solo it up again. Listen in with the rest of the track with the vocals and everything. Now that crappy sounding reverb actually sounds pretty good, and it fits in with the track really well, and it just adds some glue. Have a listen again with the vocal in. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on. So when I bring it down in the mix, bring the reverb down in the mix, now it sounds pretty good. Now listen when it's bypassed. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, running on my knees. So just that little bit of EQ, well, it's actually a lot of EQ on the high and low end. And I use a high and low pass filter usually to do this. But you can be very severe about it and make it sound pretty good. And again, what I do first, though, is I would tweak the reverb, the pre-delay, and I'd tweak the decay first to make it breathe with the track, and then I would do this. But it just gives you the idea of how this works and how well it works. Now, let's do it on the vocal, and we'll also do it with the delay, so you can hear how it works there. So first of all, here's what we have. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. Okay, that's fairly obnoxious. So let's have a listen. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. And once again, I'm listening on headphones. You may not be, so hopefully you're hearing this the same way I am. I might be hearing it a little more acute than you are. So actually what I'm going to do is goose this up a little bit so it's louder. I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased. So again, let's add our EQ.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
Already it sounds better when you get rid of the low end. Not quite as severe this time, but you get rid of the low end and suddenly it just seems to fit better. We'll do it with the high end as well.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before.
And have a listen without it.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, road.
Now, again, I would tweak the delay so it fits with the track better first, and then I would tweak the EQ and also the level. Now, again, I'm exaggerating it here so you can hear it, but you can hear what happens. Now, again, you don't have to be as severe as I was with this. I'm just showing you. I usually use a high and low pass filter here to do this, but you can just back a little off, and it makes a difference as well.
I've been kissed, loved, squeezed, teased, but never like this before. You got me tracking behind you, rolling on my knees.
What the idea is to make it fit in with the track without sticking out. We don't want it to be obnoxious. We don't even want to hear the effect many times. We just want the glue that it adds. And this is one way to do it. And again, we tweak the effects first, then we'd add a little bit of EQ or a lot of EQ. Either way, we do it until we get the sound we want. But this many times is the key, even on modulation as well, to really making your effect sound better. Okay, so I hope that we're back on. See everything okay? We're not dropping out. I hope it's working okay. By the way, there is going to be a replay, and hopefully we can tighten up the replay so it's better than what you've just seen. So anyway, for using effects, the real secret is use it with an EQ. It doesn't matter what effect it is. Could be delay, reverb, modulation, doesn't matter. If you put an EQ ahead of it, it's going to work better. It's going to sound better. The EQ before it rather than after does change the sound. It does make a difference. Now, some people prefer it after the effect, but most of the time you'll see it before the effect because it does change the way the effect is energized. So I think you'll find it's better before. Generally, you want to attenuate the low end because that's where it gets muddy in the mix. So if you get rid of a lot of that mud on the low end, you can go as high as 500 or 600 cycles, for instance, 500 or 600 hertz. You'll find that your mix won't be as cloudy. And if you roll off the high end, and I've seen it done as low as 2K, believe it or not, then what you'll get is just some nice glue without hearing the effect at all. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. So any of these things will work. Any of these ideas will work, and they'll work really well. It doesn't matter what kind of reverb. It doesn't matter what kind of delay or modulation effect. This is going to work really well on all of them. So give it a try in your next mix. All right, little commercial here for a second. If you liked these techniques that I've just showed you, there's a whole lot more in my online webinar series. It's a music mixing primer, and it's basically a whole bunch of basic tricks, basic techniques that no one's ever told you. And these are things that I just don't see anywhere else, but yet every A-list mixer that I know use on every mix. So if you're struggling to get the sound that you want on your mix, this is the place to start. The techniques are going to work on any digital audio workstation or even on a regular console, analog or digital, if you're using it. It doesn't matter what kind of music either. These are universal. They'll work on anything. So it's a 4-week program. There's 4 90-minute webinars. There's a Q&A at the end of each, and you'll also get some downloadable tracks to practice on. It'll be the same ones that I'll be working on, showing you the various techniques, and there'll be PDF checklists and guides as well. I guarantee you your mixes will be better by the end. I know this for a fact because everyone who's taken this course has written to me and said, wow, I can't believe how much better everything is. I'm going to show you a few in a little bit. And we know if you have better mixes, then you're going to get more gigs, just will, and more views, more streams, sales, whatever you're looking for. Plus, you're going to feel a whole lot better about what you're doing. Every time you go into a mix, you're going to feel like you can master it. You can really make it work. So this is week number 1. It's setting up balances and levels, and we'll take a little of what we did this a little earlier and actually take it to another level here. We're talking about fader and plug-in levels and balances between the bass and drums, which a lot of people have problems, and balance between the vocals and the track. Again, another big problem place. Talk about using compression. One of the big things is there's lots of different types of compressors, but most people don't know when and where to use them. And there's a real reason why each one exists. So I'll show you all of that. We'll go over the different types of compressors, for instance, FET or optical or um, and any other those others. We just drop out there for a second. We'll also go over the proper way to set up a compressor, which we just did, but we'll go over in a little more depth, and how to get a punchy sound on compression, mix bus compression, all of that. We'll go over it using the EQ, EQing bass and drums, EQing the vocals, the high pass filter, things like that. And using effects. We'll talk about getting effects bigger, timing delays to the track, delays and reverbs, and basic effects setup that works on almost anything. So this starts this Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern. The first one is this Saturday. If you can't make it, there's going to be recordings available, and you'll find that that'll be pretty good. You'll be able to hear just about everything, play it back until you really know what's going on and until you perfect those things as well. $97 for all 4 weeks. And it's basically on sale. Coupon code MIXWEB. Just use that. Go to mixingprimer.com to register. Again, it begins this Saturday. So again, just imagine what it's going to be like when you do a mix and all of a sudden it sounds great and it sounds better than you expected. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you do that. These are some of the comments that some of the people have given to me that have taken this. And again, everyone is really, really over the moon what they learn. My mixes have dramatically improved. You hear that over and over again. I've learned more practical knowledge over the last weeks in mixing primer in the last 2 decades. You just hear more and more of these things. Oh, this is the one I like from Ian Sparks. It's transformed my mixes and freed me from recurring problems. Someone actually said I was a magician after I mixed their stuff. My confidence is boosted. Wouldn't you like to hear that? Always feels good. So the Q&A session at the end is already worth all the money from Marius. And again, these are just some of the comments. There's plenty more. So now Q&A. I saw one before from Jay, I think, and it was something about when you start, which EQ do you start with, I think. But I think what you really meant was which instrument do you start to EQ first, or which track do you start to EQ first? And really that depends on your philosophy on where to start a mix. For some people, it's the most important thing in the track, which would be the vocals. And for others, it would be the kick and drum, kick or snare, one or the other. It's usually one or the other. Most of the time, the kick is what I've seen. But generally speaking, if you do the kick, you'll find that you start with that, start with your drums, and start to add things in and start to EQ them. But really, you have to get the most important thing in the mix really quickly, and that's the vocal. So even if you start with the kick and snare, you have to get to the vocal real fast. Okay, from Steve, I found an interesting EDM trick besides EQing the reverb, sometimes a sidechain reverb to the dry signal. Yeah, that happens a lot. I would say don't overthink this. And one of the reasons why you want to sidechain the reverb to the dry signal is you don't want the reverb or the effect to overload the dry signal. In other words, you don't want it to mask the dry signal, it'd be too loud. And this is a way of doing it. And it basically turns the reverb down until the vocal stops, and then it boosts it back up. But a lot of reverbs have that built in now. It's something called dynamic EQ or dynamic reverb. So that's kind of built in if you need it. But again, if you use the trick I just showed you, chances are you're not going to need that. Okay. Let's see, from Steve. They do it mainly for synths and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Again, it depends. I would not overthink it. There are times for that, but I wouldn't use it on every. Well, let me put it like this: I don't think you need to use it on every mix. It might be a technique that you've developed that you feel you have to use. Okay, I understand that, but most of the time you don't need it on every mix. If you add your effects correctly, that's something that you don't need. I'll give you an example. I've done hundreds of mixes. I've watched hundreds of others by some of the finest mixers in the world. I can only remember seeing that once in hundreds of mixes. Um, and it wasn't a dance track now I think about it, but I can only remember seeing that once. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't try it, but it's not something you use on every mix probably. Okay, any other questions that we have here? Now's the time. And it doesn't have to be about mixing, it could be about anything. I'm up for it with no problem. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you for taking part of this. I'm sorry for the glitches. There are dropouts sometimes. There, it's funny because we're on the internet, so sometimes it actually this happens. It's just part of it. And I'm sorry that it worked that way today, but hopefully your replay will not be that way. Okay, we got a couple more. Cool. From Mo, I produce a lot of hip hop, so what's the best way to EQ an 808? Okay, here's the thing. You probably don't have to. 808 is EQ'd already so much. You probably don't have to. I mean, again, it's one of these things. How should I EQ something? Well, I don't know. I mean, it has to do with your track. You don't EQ anything until you listen to it against all the other instruments. There's no reason to EQ anything. But usually the 808 doesn't need that much. If anything, you need to subtract frequencies, and especially the lower frequencies, or some of the higher ones around, above 100, something like that, to make the bass fit in. Sometimes that's what you have to do there, but you're subtracting, you're cutting, you're not adding. So if you're asking about adding anything, usually it's not needed. But again, it all depends on your track. It depends on the arrangement, the sounds that you have, the other instruments, all that stuff determines whether you have to EQ or not. Okay, from Aubrey, when using a mix bus, are the drums usually hitting it first, or are the vocals using a mix bus? I'm not sure what you mean there, Aubrey. They're hitting at the same time if they're both there at the same time. You're talking about the if you're talking about a subgroup, it's different. But if you're talking about the mix bus itself, hey, if they're both energizing the track at the same time, if they're both on at the same time, then they're both hitting the mix bus at the same time. Okay, let's see. From Steve, some compressors have EQ filters like an Ableton, or is there some of the frequencies of compression? What do you think about that? Yeah, I mean that's a good thing. There are certain frequencies that you don't need to compress, so that's a good way to do it. From Jay, how do you avoid maxing out your volume? I've hit it several times. Need level to go up, can't make it happen. Been pulling tracks down, lose them. Um, you're probably not gain staging things correctly. It's one of the things we go over in the mixing primer course. It's the first thing is gain staging everything so that doesn't happen. You should never run out of headroom ever. Let's put it like this: if you're compressing all your tracks correctly, then and you're compressing the mix bus correctly, that's not a problem. You just don't have that problem at all. If your gain staging is off, that could be a problem, but you can fix it easily enough by turning the various tracks down using a trim control, for instance. But it shouldn't be a problem for you. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Oh yeah, I promised this. Yeah, for staying till the end. Here is my little gift to you, and here's what you ought to do. You go to mixingprimer.com, musicmixingprimer.com, and what'll happen is you'll see webinar bonus ebook, and click on that, and you'll be able to download it, and there you have it. So thank you for attending. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, questions at bobbyowsinski.com, no problem. You can check out my courses, check out website, stuff like that. There's the URL. Don't forget, if you want your mixes to go to the next level, and I promise you they will get better, and they'll get a lot better, then my music mixing primer course is just what you need. It's half price, $97 if you use the coupon code MixWeb. And we're starting this Saturday, June 3rd. So it's something that, again, if you want your mixes to get better, this is the way to do it. If you want them to get better fast, this is the way to do it. Okay, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And I hope to see you on the Music Mixing Primer.